My name is Fiona, and I'm 28 years old. Exactly 3 years ago, during the coldest week of November, I stood on a porch in Portland, holding my 4-month-old twins, begging my biological parents for a place to sleep after my husband died in a catastrophic roofing accident. My mother didn't even unlock the deadbolt. She just stared at me through the lens of her Ring door camera and said, "You and your baggage are a curse to this family, Fiona. Figure it out yourself." They slammed the digital door on my life, thinking I was finished. They had no earthly clue that the broken, disowned woman they left freezing in the rain would turn around and build $1 million Frisian horse empire from the dirt up in Lexington, Kentucky. They had no clue that their callous rejection would set off a chain of events leaving them broke, desperate, and crying on the very same concrete, practically begging me to throw them a lifeline. If you've ever been cast aside by the people who were supposed to have your back, you know how much a little kindness matters. Take a second to hit that like button and subscribe. It helps these real, gritty stories of survival and self-respect find the people who truly need to hear them. And do me a favor, drop a comment below with where you're tuning in from and what time it is over there. I pour a fresh cup of coffee every morning and read through every single one of your responses. Now let me take you back to that rainy Tuesday on November 12th, 2023, when the porch light cut out and the real work began. My husband Noah had passed away just 10 days prior. The insurance company was holding up the claim our landlord in Oregon had already served an eviction notice, and my bank account possessed exactly 42.18. With Noah's old duffel bag packed with formula and a few changes of clothes, I spent my last dollars on a Greyhound bus ticket to my parents' house in Southeast Portland. I thought family meant a safety net. I was wrong. When I reached their driveway, the lights inside were on. I could smell the roasted chicken my mother always made on Tuesday nights. I pressed the doorbell, my knees shaking as I rocked my crying twins, Leo and Maya, against my chest. Instead of the door opening, the small blue light on their Ring camera flashed. My mother's voice came through the top-mounted speaker, tinny, cold, and entirely detached. "Fiona, don't make a scene out there," she said. "Your brother Kyle is studying for his commercial pilot license exams, and we cannot have this stress in the house. You chose to marry a construction worker, and his debts are not our responsibility. Go to a shelter." The speaker clicked off. The porch light died. I stood there in the dark, watching the Oregon rain hit the concrete, realizing that to the people who gave me life, my survival was just an inconvenient piece of data. In our family, love wasn't something you felt. It was an investment strategy, and the math was never in my favor. My father, Greg, ran a mid-sized building supply store in Ridgemont, and he viewed his children through the cold lens of a corporate balance sheet. My younger brother, Kyle, was the golden child, the line item that always got funded first. When Kyle turned 16, a brand new Honda Civic with a red bow sat in the driveway. When I turned 16, I was handed Kyle's old discarded laptop with a cracked screen and a battery that died if it wasn't plugged into a wall. "We have to be practical, Fiona," my mother Denise would say, while smoothing her tailored blouse. "Kyle has leadership potential. He's going to be a commercial pilot. You're just studying agricultural genetics at a state college. There's no real return on investment there." I swallowed the bitterness and worked 3 part-time jobs just to pay my own tuition. But the true test of their cruelty came that freezing November night after the Ring camera clicked off. I didn't even have time to cry before my phone buzzed with a text from my father. He didn't invite me inside. Instead, he sent an ultimatum document he had drafted himself. He told me that if I wanted a single dime for baby formula, I had to sign a formal quitclaim deed relinquishing my entire future inheritance right to the family house, so they could fund Kyle's advanced flight simulator training. They offered me a mere $500 check for my children's immediate survival in exchange for erasing my existence from the family ledger forever. I looked at my twins, shivering under Noah's old plaid jacket, and my heart turned to stone. I realized that to Greg and Denise, my grief was just a leveraged position they could exploit for their favorite child. I didn't sign the paper. I let the phone slip into the mud, knowing that I would rather starve than let their toxic favoritism buy my dignity. The Oregon rain felt like hundreds of tiny needles piercing through my jacket as I walked away from that porch. My father's unread ultimatum still glowing on the screen of my phone before I let it drop into the wet gravel. With Leo and Maya crying against my chest, their tiny bodies shivering from the damp November cold, I knew I had nowhere left to turn in Portland. That was when the headlights of an old, rusted 2012 Ford F-150 cut through the darkness of the driveway, mud splashing against the fenders as it pulled up to the curb. The door flung open, and Noah's father, Arthur, stepped out into the pouring rain. He didn't ask why I was standing on the street, and he didn't glance toward my parents' locked front door. He just took Noah's old duffel bag from my shoulder and wrapped his calloused sans-souci arms around me and the babies. His wife, Martha, was already in the passenger seat, pulling out a thick, handmade yellow wool blanket to wrap around the twins. We drove 3 hours from Lexington the moment the hospital called us about the accident. Fiona, Arthur said, his voice deep. Sans-souci, but steady. We were too late for Noah, but we are on time for you. As long as we are breathing, you and these babies have a home. That night, as the truck rumbled east toward Kentucky, leaving the toxic ledger of the area behind, I felt something hollow out inside my chest. The deep ache of being discarded by my own flesh and blood didn't fully disappear, but it shifted into a quiet, freezing clarity. We arrived at their farm in Lexington just as the morning fog was lifting over the white paddock fences. The property was a far cry from my father's pristine suburban home. The main barn's roof needed patching, the tractor was leaking hydraulic fluid, and the pastures were overgrown with clover. But it smelled of sweet alfalfa, wood smoke, and old leather. It smelled like a place where things were built to last, not traded for a profit. Arthur and Martha gave me Noah's old childhood bedroom, a small space overlooking the south pasture, where the oak trees arched over the roof like a protective canopy. They didn't charge me a dime of rent, and they didn't ask for a single condition or a piece of paper to validate their kindness. Instead, Arthur handed me a pair of worn leather work gloves on my third morning there. "You have your degree in agricultural genetics, kiddo," he said, using the nickname my father had long abandoned. "This soil is tired and our horses are old, but if you have the vision, we have the hands to help you build it." Standing in that Lexington mud, looking at the sans-souci wood of the barn, I realized my grandparents' old lessons were true. Family isn't always the blood you inherit. It's the people who actually show up when your world goes black. I didn't let myself spend more than 48 hours drowning in the memory of that Portland porch. Grief is a luxury when you have 2 infants relying on you for their next meal. And I had already decided that the only way to look at my biological family was through a rearview mirror. Trung trai qua Arthur va Martha, o Lexington tro than pao de qua chung toi. Ngung do la mot pao dai dang no nan chong chat. The winter of 2024 was brutal. The price of alfalfa hay had skyrocketed across Kentucky, and our electric bills for heating the foaling stalls were draining Arthur's diminishing savings. If we kept operating the traditional way, breeding standard carriage horses, the bank was going to foreclose on this land before my twins could even take their first steps. That was when I carried my second-hand laptop, the one with the cracked screen my parents thought was good enough for a scapegoat, out to the barn office and sat down next to Arthur's old filing cabinets. "Arthur," I said, setting down 2 mugs of black coffee, "we aren't going to compete with the wealthy corporate thoroughbred stables down the road. We are going to change the science of equine breeding entirely." Using my background in agricultural genetics from Oregon State, I began analyzing the DNA logs of Arthur's aging Friesian herd. Friesians are beautiful, powerful black horses, but the breed in America has been plagued by genetic issues due to a narrow gene pool. I spent long, exhausting nights, sleeping only 4 hours between Leo and Maya's bottle feedings, mapping out genetic sequences from hair roots and blood samples I took from our oldest mare, Athena. By February, I isolated exactly what I was looking for: a rare homozygous dominant gene mutation in Athena's lineage that provided complete immunity to equine metabolic syndrome, a disease currently wiping out millions of dollars of stock across the United States. Arthur didn't understand the genetic charts I drew on his old whiteboard, but he understood the Sansui reality of hard work. He stood next to me during the frozen mornings, his leather gloves guiding the ultrasound equipment while I carefully managed the selective breeding cycles. We didn't rely on luck. We relied on precision data and the relentless blue-collar discipline my father had claimed I lacked. By the time the spring of 2025 arrived, our first 3 mutated Frisian foals were born. Perfect, midnight black, and packing a genetic shield that no other stable in the country could replicate. Word spread through the insular Kentucky horse community like fire through dry straw. Wealthy breeders from Louisville and Lexington started parking their luxury SUVs in our gravel driveway, offering thousands just to look at our data logs. We went from scraping by on grocery store coupons to expanding our pastures, hiring farriers, and upgrading our security systems. I rebuilt my life from the dirt up on my own terms, turning our once-forgotten family farm into a certified goldmine of agricultural biotechnology. But as the numbers on our balance sheet grew larger, the digital footprint of our success began traveling far beyond the borders of Kentucky, reaching the very people who had once left me in the rain. The sudden rise of our farm wasn't something I could hide under a bushel, and I knew it. By the summer of 2025, when luxury SUVs from Louisville and Cincinnati started filling our graveled driveway just to view our DNA registries, I knew the numbers were outgrowing our small-town borders. In America, when a disowned woman from the mud starts building an empire, the news travels faster than sheet lightning. I knew my biological family in Portland. I knew that Greg and Denise operated like financial heat-seeking missiles, and it was only a matter of time before they smelled the cash and tried to rewrite history. That is exactly why 12 months ago, I quietly walked into a small corporate law office downtown and retained Margaret Caldwell. I didn't do it out of paranoia. I did it as a professional risk management strategy. Together, Margaret and I built a silent, airtight legal fortress. I downloaded the original Ring camera footage from that freezing Tuesday night into a secure cloud drive. I had my father's $500 inheritance waiver text message printed, verified, and locked in a fireproof safe. I was ready for the vultures before they even knew I had anything worth stealing. And then, in May 2026, the real storm made landfall. A senior executive from Biogenetics Corp in Boston sat at my kitchen table and slid a heavy leather portfolio across the maplewood. It was a global patent acquisition contract for our exclusive Frisian gene mutation. The buyout figure printed on the bottom line was a staggering $150 million. Arthur's hands shook slightly as he looked at the sheet of zeros, but mine didn't. I looked the corporate rep in the eye, adjusted my faded denim cuffs, and signed my name with the calm precision of an auditor. If you were sitting across from me at this table, knowing your face was about to hit the national news with a 9-figure check, what would your next move be? Would you wait for the phone to ring? Or would you block them before they could even say hello? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I love reading your perspectives over my morning coffee. And if you're standing with a mother who used her brain to protect her babies from a toxic system, hit that like and subscribe button. The Lexington Herald-Leader ran the front page story the very next morning. Kentucky Farm Lab secures $150 biotech contract. My full name, Fiona Tremaine, was bolded in the very first sentence. Before the morning pot of coffee had even finished brewing, the old phone in my pocket buzzed with a call from a 503 area code, Portland, Oregon. I didn't answer that first call. I didn't answer the next 4 that followed it over the next 2 hours either. I just sat on the porch, watching the morning sun catch the dark, glossy coats of our Frisian mares in the paddock, letting the phone vibrate against the Sansui cedar railing until it finally went quiet. They had ignored my existence for 36 months, so I figured they could handle a few hours of waiting. By noon, the voicemails started piling up, and when I finally pressed play, The sheer audacity of my mother's voice coming through the speaker made my blood run cold. "Fiona, darling, it's Mom," Denise said, her tone dripping with an artificial, breathless warmth that I hadn't heard since before I was discarded. "Your father and I just saw the article on Bloomberg Business, and my goodness, we are just absolutely beside ourselves with pride. We always knew your agricultural genetics degree would turn into something extraordinary, sweetie. We've been talking, and life is simply too short to let old misunderstandings keep a family apart. We bought plane tickets this morning, and we're flying into Bluegrass Airport in Lexington on Friday to finally see you and our beautiful grandchildren." Old misunderstandings. That was how she chose to reclassify the night she left a grieving widow and 2 4-month-old infants on a freezing concrete porch. She didn't say the word sorry, and she didn't acknowledge the $500 waiver text my father had sent. She just called it a misunderstanding because $150 million has a way of making people rewrite their own history. Arthur walked out onto the porch just as the voicemail ended, holding a fresh bucket of feed and looking at me with those steady, knowing gray eyes. "They're coming, aren't they?" he asked quietly, his voice like gravel scraping over oak. "Friday morning," I replied, slipping the phone back into my pocket. Arthur nodded once, not with anger, but with the calm, sans-souci resolve of a man who had spent his entire life facing down bad weather. "Let them come, Fiona," he said, setting the bucket down. "The fences are locked, the title is safe, and we have work to do before they get here. Ken can only bite you if you let them at your table." He was right, but I knew Denise wouldn't just expect a seat at my table. She would expect to take the whole thing home with her. Later that afternoon, a text from my sister Courtney arrived. The first message from her in 3 long years. "Fiona, just so you know, Kyle is coming too," it read. "His flight school debt has been really stressful on Mom and Dad, and we really hope we can handle this as a responsible family. See you Friday." They were already coordinating, building their strategy, and calculating how to partition an empire they had tried to starve in the cradle. I closed my laptop, walked out to the main barn, and spent the rest of the evening checking the hooves of our spring foals, letting the sans-souci reality of the farm clear the grease of their words from my mind. I was ready for Friday, and more importantly, Margaret Caldwell's office had just confirmed that our legal paperwork was officially processed and sealed. The white Cadillac rental sedan pulled up our driveway on Friday morning, dust settling over the pristine fencing of our training paddocks. Out stepped Greg, Denise, and my younger brother Kyle. Denise wore an ivory cashmere sweater and her church pearls, looking less like a mother and more like a real estate appraiser inspecting a luxury listing. My father didn't look at the rolling pastures. His eyes were locked entirely on the Biogenetics Corp security decals attached to our main gate. I stood on the porch in my faded flannel shirt, arms crossed, letting the silence stretch. "Fiona, sweetie," my mother cried, rushing forward with her arms open. I simply took half a step back, letting her embrace hit nothing but the cold Kentucky air. Her perfect social smile fractured for a split second before she smoothed her hair. "We didn't come to look at the architecture, Denise," my father interrupted, his voice dropping into that sharp managerial tone he used when a business contract went sideways. We walked into the barn office, where Arthur was already seated at the old maple table. My father didn't shake Arthur's hand. He just sat down and placed a thick leather-bound folder right in the center of the table. He didn't ask how Leo and Maya were doing, and he didn't apologize for the 3 years of absolute silence. Instead, he pushed a single printed document across the maple wood toward me. The bolded title at the top of the page read, "Itemized Invoice of Parental Maintenance and Educational Restructuring." It was a line-by-line financial calculation of every single dollar they had spent on me from the day I was born until my 18th birthday. Health insurance premiums, grocery bills, state college application fees, and even my childhood dental work. The grand total scrawled at the bottom in my father's precise blue ink was $1.5 million, itemized alongside a secondary demand for a 30% permanent stake in our Frisian gene patent. "This is what families do, Fiona," my father said, his voice flat, factual, and entirely lacking in human warmth. We invested 18 years into your survival, and now that your little horse hobby has turned a profit, it's time to settle the account so your brother can finish his flight hours and save the family store from foreclosure. They didn't see a daughter who had survived a tragedy. They saw a corporate asset they could liquidate to bail out their golden child. I looked up at Greg, my face as calm as an auditor's, and let the paper drop onto the table. "The account is already settled, Dad," I said quietly, my voice carrying the weight of a legal gavel. "And you're going to find out exactly why at tomorrow night's equine gala." The grand ballroom of the Griffin Gate Marriott in Lexington was a sea of old money, crystal chandeliers, and heavy silk gowns when the Saturday night equine gala finally commenced. Over 300 guests filled the room: prominent Kentucky horse breeders, federal agricultural officials, and wealthy investors who held the keys to the state's multi-billion-dollar equine industry. My biological family arrived early, dressed in formal wear they could no longer afford, moving through the crowd with the unearned confidence of people who believed they were about to inherit a fortune. Greg adjusted his tuxedo cuffs, while Denise smoothed her lavender velvet dress, whispering to a prominent stable owner near the entrance that her daughter was the mastermind behind the recent Biogenetics Corp headline. They had spent the last 24 hours treating my $1.5 million parental maintenance invoice like an absolute certainty, completely oblivious to the legal architecture I had built behind their backs. I watched them from the elevated media platform at the front of the room, standing next to Arthur and Martha, who looked sensui but entirely dignified in their formal attire. At 8:30 p.m., the Bluegrass Ensemble stopped playing, and the overhead spotlights shifted directly toward the main stage as the university president stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are honored to recognize a breakthrough that will secure the biological future of the American Frisian breed." His voice echoed across the silent ballroom. "Please join me in welcoming our majority shareholder and chief geneticist, Fiona Tremaine." The room erupted into applause as I walked down the stage steps, the sansui leather folder containing my counter documents tucked firmly under my arm. I didn't look at the corporate reps or the local politicians. My eyes were locked entirely on table 12, where my biological parents sat frozen, their faces turning a stark mottled white as my full name filled the audio system. Greg's hand stopped halfway to his champagne glass, and Denise gripped her pearls so tightly the silk string threatened to snap. They had spent years telling me I had no return on investment, and now they had to sit in a room full of Boston's elite and watch 300 people give the scapegoat a standing ovation. As the applause subsided, my family's private attorney, a slick real estate lawyer they had dragged from Portland, stepped onto the platform edge, clearing his throat to interrupt the proceedings with their financial demands. I looked at him, then at my father, my face as calm and factual as an auditor reviewing a bankrupt ledger. "Mr. Tremaine," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the microphone before he could even open his mouth. "You brought an invoice to my farm yesterday, but tonight, the law is going to read you the final balance." The private attorney my father hired stepped backward as my family law lawyer, Margaret Caldwell, calmly walked onto the main stage carrying a single navy blue leather binder. The room went completely breathless. The clinking of crystal glasses died down, replaced by a heavy, echoing silence that stretched across all 30 tables. My father, Greg, stood up at table 12, his face tightening with a mixture of confusion and corporate arrogance as Margaret opened the rings of her binder. "Mr. Tremaine," Margaret said, her voice amplified by the ballroom's sound system, completely cold, measured, and devoid of theatrics. "You brought a $1.5 million parental maintenance invoice to my client's horse farm, claiming a legal right to 30% of her biopharmaceutical contract based on next of kin inheritance laws. But you made one fatal mistake. You assumed my client was operating as an individual." Margaret adjusted her glasses and pulled out a certified, stamped document from the United States Patent and Trademark Office, alongside a heavily notarized trust agreement. Exactly 12 months ago, long before Biogenetics Corp made an offer, the exclusive global patent rights to the Frisian gene mutation were legally transferred into an irrevocable trust. The sole permanent beneficiaries of this trust are Fiona's 3-year-old twins, Leo and Maya. The designated trustees who manage every single asset are Arthur and Martha Tremaine. My mother's jaw dropped open. Her face cycled from pink to a ghostly, chalky white as she stared at the projection screen behind me. Under federal and Kentucky estate laws, Margaret continued, tapping the paper with her pen, an irrevocable trust is an impenetrable legal fortress. Assets held within it do not belong to Fiona Tremaine. They cannot enter probate. They cannot be dissolved by a court, and they are completely immune to any personal liens or ancestral claims. Furthermore, Fiona has legally signed a contract to act solely as the chief executive officer of the trust's operations, drawing an annual salary of exactly $1. A wave of sharp murmurs erupted through the ballroom as prominent breeders and legal officials looked at my father with open disdain. I stood at the podium, looking down at the man who had tried to force me onto a concrete porch in the rain 3 years ago. "Dad," I said into the microphone, my voice steady, conversational, and completely factual. "I have a net worth of $1 on paper. My children own the empire. You brought a line item invoice to cash in on my life. But there is no personal asset for you to leverage. And there is no money for you to steal. The balance is zero." My brother Kyle slumped into his chair, his hands buried deep in his leather jacket pockets, knowing his flight school debt would never be washed away by my sweat. The fortress had held perfectly, leaving the Ken completely stranded in the middle of their own calculated trap. The silence that settled over table 12 after the contract details were read was the loudest thing in that hotel ballroom. My father sat down heavily, his fingers slipping off the edge of his leather folder as the realization hit him like a cold wave. He had spent his entire life managing risks and calculating returns, but he never factored in the quiet resilience of a daughter who had stopped waiting for his validation. Denise didn't try to make another scene. She just stared at the signed trust documents on the projection screen, her theatrical tears completely drying up as the reality of their Siet Nem-Aye debt in Portland crushed whatever dignity she had left. They left the Griffin Gate Marriott before the main course was even served, slipping out through the service exit like ghosts who had finally realized they no longer held a claim on the living. 2 weeks after the gala, the white Cadillac rental was long gone, and the quiet san sui rhythm of our Lexington farm returned. My father sent one final text message before I blocked his number for good, 3 short sentences scrawled on a digital ledger. "I was wrong about the investment, Fiona. I am sorry I didn't see what you were building sooner. Please don't let Kyle lose his license." I didn't reply because some apologies are just receipts for a debt that can never be paid back. Instead, I took Leo and Maya out to the western paddock, watching them laugh as Arthur hoisted them onto the back of our oldest Frisian mare, Athena. Arthur looked at me over his shoulder, his worn leather gloves resting on the halter, a peaceful grin cutting through his weathered face. "The fences are holding, kiddo," he said softly, using the name that now meant safety, not smallness. "The babies are safe, and the mud is ours." I leaned against the cedar rail, feeling the warm Kentucky sun on my face, completely free from the weight of people who only loved me when the numbers were profitable. Setting Songpang boundaries isn't about cruelty, it's about survival. And I had finally built a fortress that no amount of biological leverage could ever tear down. If you are watching this right now, sitting at your own table, wondering if your worth is defined by the people who failed to appreciate you, I want you to take a breath and listen to me. Your family isn't the bloodline that demands your sacrifice. It's the hands that reach out to hold you when the freezing rain starts to fall. You have the absolute right to walk away from the people who treat your dignity like a budget deficit. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of my journey. If my story reminded you that facts, self-respect, and true family always get the final word, please hit that like button and subscribe with notifications turned on. I read through your thoughts every morning, so drop a comment below and share your own experiences with setting hard boundaries. And make sure to check the description below, because in our next episode, I'm going to share the story of a grandmother who secretly altered her $47 million real estate will after her own children packed her belongings into a nursing home behind her back. Until next time, remember, your worth is non-negotiable. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you soon.